tell? Is it that I'm getting sneakier? I wish I had a clean mind, I'll tell you. No, I think it would be terrible. Wouldn't you just think how it would be if you did. Have you ever met anybody who's a human compost heap? I'm sorry. Bring it up there, Matthew. Oh, I'm rotten, you know what? And now, here it is. Here comes, I forgot to start a show. Who the heck? It's on the tip of my tongue. No, it's not Buster Keaton. It's, We are about to salute a lost and gone hero on the American scene. So we'll get ready out there. Everybody, sit down, pull in your gut. I want you to play it cool and honest. Remember what happened to Pinocchio. You don't want it to happen to you. All right, Matt, sneak it in. Now, this was written about 1897, and it's called The Night Operator. In this little lamp-lit office through the gloomy hours of night sits the lone night operator from the eve till morning light, watching close with sharpened hearing what the sleepless sounders say, talking with their wakeful neighbors in the stations far away. Converse with his far-off neighbors drives the dull night hours along, while his duties and his orders all the while his memory throng. Though his eyelids droop at midnight, fain to close themselves in sleep, no, not for his the bliss of slumber. He must still his vigil keep. All the while, the sleepless sounder tells its tale of joy or woe. Now it tells of birth or marriage, and now hearts with rapture glow. Now it tells of fatal sickness. Now it speaks with wailing breath, while it tells in mournful accents of some dear friend's sudden death. Now I see a scowl of anger cloud the operator's brow, hear him breaking and ascending. Wonder what's the matter now? 'Tis some plug that is receiving. Hear him break and say GA 4 or 5 times in one message ere he deigns to sound OK. Now his office call is sounded. How the glistening sounder clicks, and he catches quick the order. Flag and hold train number 6. Quickly comes another order for a freight train overdue, and the sounder clicks it fiercely. Hurry up, the 32. Now he's fighting for the circuit with some fellow working west. One can never break the other. Each one does his level best. Quickly speaks the train dispatcher. How his sharp words ringing come. Stop, I tell you, stop this braking, or I'll send you rascals home. Stop. Little knows the man or woman swiftly speeding over the rail how the safety or the danger rests on one who dares not fail. Rests on the night operator seated in his lonely room. One mistaking of an order sends the train to fearful doom. So kindly greet the operator. He is human, nothing else. Let some kind word gently spoken serve his tired heart to bless. Oft he tires, answering questions, and his face looks hard as stone, but the heart within his bosom beats as kindly as your own. The night operator. Hold it there, old Matt. You know what they're referring to? Do you know what a night operator is? You know what a sounder is he's talking about? That's code, yeah. And he's the guy on the the night operator. And that there is a hero. That's a law. Do you know that around the time of roughly the turn of the century, one of the most important guys in any town was the telegraph operator. In fact, earlier than the turn of the century, just after the Civil War, because he connected all. In other words, he was the contact from one town to the next. And all this wild stuff would come through his wire. He knew everything that was going on in town. And It's and I remember. I'm so sorry that it happened, but it did. How many times have you moved in your life when you move, from one place, one part of the country to the next? You used to live around Boston, didn't you, man? When you moved, did you just come down with a suitcase, or did you actually have stuff to move? You didn't have much. But have you ever made a real move? Oh, man, that's a buster. I mean, I'll tell you, I really hate, to do that kind of stuff, because I've had some real bad experiences, and I lost something in a move once that I have never forgotten, that bugged me, and I've been bugged ever since about it. I'd love to, love to get it again, but I don't expect to ever do it. That I had this uncle who worked on the Rock Island Railroad, and he was a very remote uncle. You know how in your family you'll have people that are closer. You see all the time. They have some meaning to you. But this uncle was kind of like, he was like a second uncle or something, some strange relationship. We'd see him about once every 3 or 4 years, and he was very remote from my thinking. And older man, much older, older than all the other people in the family. He's even older than my grandfather, but they called him Uncle. And he was. And he was a big, heavy-set guy with a black vest. I'll tell you how he looked. He looked a little like Edward Arnold. Ever seen Edward Arnold in the movies? Well, he looked like Edward Arnold. And he worked at the main central, what they call the Chicago division of the Rock Island Road. Now, the Rock Island Road, you know what the Rock Island Road is. This is a famous railroad. And do you know what the insignia of the Rock Island Road is? If you see it on a freight car going by, really good railroaders can see freight cars going by in their sleep, and they can tell you what railroad it is and what division and everything about it. Just from that insignia, every railroad has an insignia. What's the insignia, say, for example, of the Canadian Pacific? You imagine in your eye? How about which one, or I'll ask you another one. Which one has the big mountain sheep standing on a mountain peak? Tremendous picture on the side of their trains. What is the Pensy got? What is the Pennsylvania Railroad? What is the insignia of the B&O? You know these? What's the insignia? Now think about it, because you've probably seen a million freight cars in your life. Try to think about it. What's the insignia, say, for example, of the Chesapeake and Ohio? Now you've seen it. You've seen it 1,000 times. Probably more than that, actually. You don't know any of these, do you? Well, I'll award the brass figurine with bronze oak leaf palm if anyone can tell me what the insignia of the Rock Island is and was. And it's one of the most romantic of all the insignia. It's a beautiful insignia. And the thing that used to get me about it all the time is that he'd worked for the railroad so long. He had, in the railroad, they got all this tradition, you see. They don't, many places don't have tradition. There's nothing, when a guy works at a place 30 years, that's it, he just, he lives there and works there, and that's the end of it. And they may give him a watch, and in the back it says for 30 years service, from the gang in the accounting office. That's about it. But railroads have tradition, and guys that work on these different lines are really kind of identified with these lines. And so this uncle of mine, Uncle Tom, would show up. When he would show up once in a while, he had this watch chain, big chain, was on the front of his vest. And on the watch chain was a magnificent gold replica of the Rock Island Road insignia that they had given him for something. And it was raised. It was in bas relief. And it was a beautiful thing. It really was. It was a lovely piece of sculpture. And he would just have this thing hanging down there, and it was neat and beautiful. And all of us kids would look at that thing. So he'd show it to us all the time when he'd come. It's about all. Never talked to us. He was, there are some men that are really grown-up men, by grown-up men. They have no contact with kids at all. Kids are like another race. And he does, you don't sit on his knee. He doesn't dangle you on the knee. I think he just comes in like a ship under full sail. And Uncle Tom would come in, and he's a railroad man, and he worked in the main office of the Chicago division. Well, one weekend when we were visiting him, one of the rare times we visited his house was in Chicago, and he had one of these apartments that was heated, steam heated. I always remember the fantastic heat in this apartment. Some types are like that. And he took me and my kid brother and two of my cousins down to his office to see his office. That was his idea of a great afternoon for the kids, because his life was his work, and he couldn't imagine anything more exciting than to go to his office. Well, it was. We went down to this office, and of course he took us into this place. And that's when I saw these sounders. And they had these little boxes all along the wall. It was a tremendous office right there in the big freight yards on the south side of Chicago. And you could see freights for miles out of these big spotless windows they had. And you'd see the freights, and you'd see all those tracks and the gandy dances and the guys walking and working around out there. And all along the walls, in these little wooden things, were the sounders. Have you ever heard these sounders going? They just go... And there were two or three guys sitting next to these sounders with very cool-looking types, and they have these green eye shields. And they're sitting down there, and they're listening to they're just listening to this. And I didn't know what they were. I knew nothing about this. To me, this was a whole new thing with guys sitting there listening to ticks, ticking away. And once in a while, one would turn to the other and say, hey, listen to Louis, so-and-so. And they're having conversations back and forth with this thing. And my eyes are as big as things, like saucers. Well, so old Uncle Tom takes us all around the place, in and out of the office, and you see these tickers and all that stuff going, and there's guys walking around with big sheets of paper, and they had adding machines. And the smell of a real office is a smell. It's a smell of 1,000 musty papers, million musty papers. It's the smell of ancient typewriter ribbons moldering in the bottom of cabinets. It's the smell of elderly rubber bands turning to stone. The smell of rusting paper clips. And the guys themselves, it's a curious, static smell. And he found it very exciting. This was his whole life built in this office. And on the wall, they had this tremendous clock, which I remember. A big railroad clock, nothing's more official than railroad time. It was a great big white clock, big stark white face with those big hands. And it was one of these with a big glass panel under it and a swinging pendulum. And it's going... that kind of clock, just ticking away. And every minute it would go dunk. The hand would move one little jump, dunk. Official railroad time. And old Uncle Tom, he takes out this fantastic watch. He had this. You know what railroad watches look like, Matt? It had a big Elgin, big, fantastic Elgin watch. And every one of those guys would walk into this office and they'd take out their watch and they'd look up at this big watch. They'd look. They'd stand there and look. And then they'd wind their watch a little bit. The railroad man's watch is like, it's his life. I mean, it's based on his whole scene. So Uncle Tom took us all over the office. And you could smell this musty smell. WOR, New York.
I like just about everything in Sunday Newsday, but I guess that LI magazine is my favorite section.
Those pleasure maps in LI are fantastic.
The pull-out TV book covers the whole week. Now we don't have to buy one.
These Long Islanders are talking about something very close to my heart. I'm Clive Irving, editor of LI, the full-color magazine that comes with Sunday Newsday. As an Englishman in America, I'd like to tell you about something that has appeal in both our countries, a real bargain. In any language, Sunday Newsday is a fantastic buy for only 25 cents. On Sunday, you get more of everything: news, features, columns, sports, community service. You get LI magazine and color comics. You also get the pull-out TV book with a full week's listings, plus special guides to movies, sports shows, and children's programs. Sunday Newsday. We're very glad you like it.
Well, it's Zip Kit time here, and it's a curious name. What it boils down to is if you have any skin problems, whiteheads, blackheads, and so forth, acnes, and so on, well, here's a new thing. It's called the Zip Kit by Dermacon Laboratories, and it consists of 3 proven medicines, which include this: the Dermacon Skin Cleanser, which does what it says it does; the Dermacon Medicated Lotion, which you use during the day to dry out blemishes and so on; and the Dermacon Medicated Cream, which you apply at night, which helps heal and soothe while you sleep. Now, the Zip Kit comes with all 3 of these things, and you can buy the Dermacon Zip Kit at Genovese, Whalen, Mac, Drug Guild, and other leading pharmacies. Now, the name is the Dermacon Zip Kit. In fact, they say give it a 30-day trial, and it costs less than 25 cents a day to try, and you'll see the difference. The name again is Dermacon Zip Kit. Try it. You can pick it up at the drugstore. I got everybody out there going out of their minds trying to think of these insignia. Well, now, the reason I knew these insignia, that's another story, too, was that directly behind our house when I was a kid, about, I'd say a quarter of a mile behind our house, the main trunk line went through that went into the Chicago stockyards and all through the famous Indiana Harbor, East Chicago hump, they call it, where a lot of the switching, all the freight cars were all loaded and so on for the trips all across the country. You see, Chicago has been a railhead and is a railhead. And we lived right next to the main trunk that went east to Chicago. Every train that came from the east, in other words, and from the south, passed within a quarter of a mile of my house. So one of the things we used to do on the way home from school, we'd go along the railroad tracks and we'd see these trains going by. And by the way, as a byproduct of it, I would say that when I was in grade school and early high school, that at least 5 of the kids I went to school with were killed by trains, at least. And to even carry it further than that, see, the train is such a reality in that town, to carry it further, at least 3 of my teachers, including my high school history teacher, were killed by trains. And, well, it's just the way it is. They go through there. They used to go clipping through there sometimes 75, 80 miles an hour right through. I've seen many an accident of that kind. As a matter of fact, one night coming home from school, I had a car, and I was driving home. I think I've told the story. This is quite common, but this was about 7:30, 8 o'clock at night, and every night at a certain time, this big, fast, extremely fast train would go through. It was a limited, special train would go roaring through. One of the big, fast passenger trains. And it would go through about between 75 and 90 miles an hour. Now, that's a lot of weight. That's a fantastic power. And I'm driving home from school one night, and this was late in the evening. I stayed there for football practice, as a matter of fact. It was about, something like 7:30, and it was twilight, just getting dusk. And I was driving on this concrete highway road, and on either side of me was nothing but fields, vacant lots and fields and so forth, and high-tension wires off to my left. I can see the scene because it was such a wild moment that it's engraved in my memory. But I was driving along, radio's going on in the car, and I'm just playing it cool. I'm kind of tired out from practice and all that. And ahead of me is a car about a quarter of a mile ahead of me. And that's all. There were no other cars on the road at that time, or at least that I could see. He's up ahead, I'm driving along. Well, we're just rolling along there about 45, 50 miles an hour, when I see coming way off on the horizon, I see this big highball special coming off to the left. And he had his light on, and boy, he is really screaming. And a big diesel engine out in front there, and he's got that baby wound up and going full blast. It was a streamliner, a big diesel engine. And I could see those silver and orange cars all lined up there out in back of him. He must have had 15, 20, 30 cars all lit up because it was just about that time of the night. You could see the diners and everything. And he's belting it through the prairies there, heading to Chicago. And you hear this boop. He lays it out. Well, I'm driving along. I can see him coming. He's off there to my left. He's about, when I first saw him, he must have been about a mile and a quarter away with everything going. And ahead of me is a flasher. one of these red flashers. They didn't have gates there, just red flasher, but it was so visible there was no way you could miss it. You could see the train and the flasher, and the thing is going ding, 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 and the red lights are going off and on. And I'm starting to slow down, and I see this car ahead of me. I couldn't believe what I was seeing at first. This car ahead of me is continuing to go without even slowing up. He just continued to go. Well, now I thought to myself, is this guy going to try to beat this thing or what? Well, I could see at a glance, you can tell he just wasn't going to beat it. That either he was going to smack into the side of that thing or he was going to stop. He wasn't going to beat it. And I'm watching it. It's like a Greek tragedy or something. I'm driving along there, and I'm slowing up by now, see? And this train is now not more than a quarter of a mile away, and boy, I can see that thing going. She is just roaring. You know that fantastic sound of a train? He's just going. Well, it couldn't have been timed better. It was the kind of timing that you see when a ball player gets one right on the button and drives it right over the center field wall. He didn't pull it. He didn't slice it. It was a direct, full, right over the second baseman's shot. Now, that's hitting it straight on. Well, this guy hit the front of the train, and the car arrived at the intersection of the tracks and the road exactly at the same time. Exactly. And the guy was driving a four-door Ford, I remember. He's and a rather new car. He's right up ahead of me. And it just hit, and it went so fast and so quickly, it didn't even make any noise. That's what was so amazing, because I was not more than, possibly a block behind this guy. It just went whap, just like that. Just went whap. He's gone. There I am. The car disappeared completely, except for one thing. Just as he hit him, at the moment of impact, I saw something go up in the air, just high up. It must have gone, 5 stories in the air. It must have gone 50 feet in the air, just straight up, just turning over and over and over. And it arched over and went on the other side of the train. I didn't see what it was at first. And it was gone. Nothing there. There was some glass down on the tracks. I stopped instantly, and I jumped out. I saw this guy get hit. And I saw glass down there. Nothing. It's unbelievable. Except one thing. I ran over into the weeds. I figured maybe he was in there. And there was his motor. The thing tossed the engine right out of his car, and it was hot, and oil was running out of it. And there it was. That's all there was. Well, I came back up on the road. My car's there, and I see a car coming towards me. The guy slows up. I'm waving him, you see. And the guy slows up. And this is what's the trouble, see? I said, the guy just got hit here. He said, what do you mean? Where is he? I said, well, he just got hit. I just saw him. He says, well, where is the guy? I said, this is all that's left, his engine. What are we going to do? Because, I was a kid. I didn't know what the heck to do. Well, the two of us sort of milled around like that. I didn't know what to do. So we both got into his car, then left my car. We drove on down, maybe a mile or two, to a gas station down there. And told this guy, the gas station, somebody just got hit back there. He said, that happens about every 3 or 4 days. He says, is he back there? I says, no, he said, well, then I know where he is. He says, wait a minute, I'll make a call. And he picked up the phone, and he called another filling station, which was about 2 miles down, and by that time, the train had stopped at roughly a 2-mile time before he could get that train stopped. And his car was just neatly tucked in under the front of that train, as flat and as neat and as clean as a sardine can. So, when you live, around these things, you get kind of used to this thing. Well, we used to come down the tracks every night. We used to, when you're with a thing like that, you tend to get you tend to play with it a bit. And we used to play bullfight, for example. Guys would run out on the tracks, and along would come this fantastic train, like the B&O or the El Capitan or one of those tremendous trains, come roaring out of the darkness. And the kid would jump right off the track and, you're playing chicken, say, off he'd go. Well, I know 2 kids that didn't get off, that didn't make it, In fact, I know one kid, it's not funny, I know one kid that did get off, but he was sucked right in. You know, that leaves a tremendous wake behind it, and he was just pulled right in. That was the end of the ball game. So it's an exciting scene living around a red. And then once in a while, something really wild happens. Like one night, these train tracks skirt Lake Michigan, and they go right through the steel mills. Now, the steel mills are built on either side of the train tracks. If you ever ridden a train out in that area, even taking an interurban train from Chicago, say, out to Gary or a place like that, it goes right through the mills. Well, among other things, they go right over a couple of tremendous canals that are built into the lake. Now, Lake Michigan is a deep lake, and these canals are very deep canals. They're quite wide, too. They're I'd say, probably a quarter of a mile, maybe a half mile wide in some places. This is about a quarter of a mile wide. And the canals are used for bringing in the big ore boats that would come in with the coal and coke and ore, you see, from up around places like Duluth and so on, for the steel mills. Well, they had bridges over these things. And when a train was going through, like one of these big, fantastic trains going through, and this was one day I happened to be working in the mill at this time. I was just a kid when it happened. It was this summer. And it happened about 8, maybe 7:30, quarter to 8 in the morning, actually. I'd been working all night, so it seemed like night to me, but it was early in the morning. And this train used to go clipping through every morning about 8, and he would go right through the mills, I would say probably in the vicinity of 85 miles an hour. And, of course, it was a through track, and those bridges were all down, everything was cool. Well, something happened this morning, and for some reason or other, I remember hearing it. I can remember in the mill suddenly hearing this ungodly sound. Now, you hear sounds in the mill. It's part of the mill life, and the sounds you don't pay much attention to, unless you hear one that is completely off the wall, that obviously is not part of the scheme or the scenario. This was a high-pitched shriek that must have gone on. It seemed like it went on for 5 minutes, but it probably didn't. But it just was a high pitch. It went louder and louder and louder. It sounded like something growing. And then it suddenly stopped, and there was a dull thump, just a dull thump, just boom. And then you could hear from all sides, from every point of the compass, sirens wailing. And people crowded out of the mill. I ran out with a couple of other guys, and what a fantastic sight. What had happened was that this guy was highballing through, the engineer, and it was a passenger train, full bore. He must have been going 70, 75, 80 miles an hour, when for some reason or other, by some terrible mistake, the bridge was out ahead of him. Now, that type of bridge is not the kind that raises up like this, but it's the kind that turns, meaning that before this guy was nothing but a sheer drop into the water. Well, that train, he threw that thing into reverse. He apparently put on the brakes. He did everything he could, and that train at 80 or 90 miles an hour slid something like 1.25 miles, just slid. And he just got it stopped, except for one thing. The engine toppled into this water, which was tremendously deep for these big, deep draft boats that would come in. The engine just toppled over the cliff and just hung in like that. And the only fatality was the engineer. And the entire train was saved, everybody. And they were all having breakfast, of course, they were all thrown around, but nobody was hurt in the train. And he was in the cab. And I remember the sight when they were pulling that engine out, and the engineer was in the cab, and they dove in and pulled him out. I was all involved in all this thing. At that point, you begin to have a real awareness of railroads. I mean, when you see enough of these things. And so we used to walk along the tracks at night, coming home from school, and we'd memorize these insignia. And you used to have games, you know, who would not identify an insignia first. It's like, you know how kids used to do that with cars, identifying cars. What's this car and what's that car? Well, we used to identify railroad insignia. And so when a freight train would go by, there'd be like 50 different types of cars on it, not just one car, maybe a B&O train, but they would have all kinds. Do you know for example, do you know the L&N insignia? You ever hear of the Great Northern? You heard it? That's right. Now you're coming. Now you're beginning. Yeah, now you're seeing it. That's right. Now you're hitting it. Yeah, the Southern Pacific. You know what that one is? Oh, there's a lot of great. These are beautiful things, and we got so that I got to identify maybe 75, 80 of them. Yeah, well, you know, just like kids identify baseball cards or something. So we could identify all of them. Well, anyway, this particular day that I remember was it bugs me because of this move that I took. You didn't think I was going to get back to that, did you? Well, this is the essence of the story. I was so fascinated, see, by this whole office that my Uncle Tom worked in. And I was a little bit older than all the other cousins. And so I was old enough that he could tell me things about this. The other kids were little, see. And so on that day, he took us out on the train. He had a pass, and we rode on the Rock Island. We took, all of us got on the train. And, you know, of course, he's a big shot. He knew everybody. He wasn't really a big shot, but he was well known. All these railroad guys knew each other. So old Tom takes us on the train, and the porters and the conductors were coming back and saying hello to us, and they took us up to the front of the train, and we went up to Milwaukee. I remember that day. It was fantastic, looking out of the window, riding on the train, and then we got off and came back. Well, that was the great Sunday afternoon. It's amazing how you can remember one Sunday out of your childhood. So the old guy knew what he was doing. So anyway, we came back, and I was fascinated by these sounders. These guys sitting there talking with us. And I guess that's the beginning of my original interest in amateur radio. Just the idea of these guys being able to hear these clicks, and they knew what they were saying. They were talking. And they were getting messages from all over the country. And they talked back and forth. I was fascinated by that. You know, kids were always hung on being able to talk to each other at a distance. So this is one of the reasons why the tremendous involvement in the telephone. You know, the whole idea of having your own walkie-talkie. You know, it's like being invisible, being able to go any place. And so I was really intrigued by this clacker. And so Uncle Tommy listened to that, and we were talking about it. He was telling me how it worked, and he showed me this guy who was doing it. Well, my birthday was about 6 or 7 weeks after that. And sure enough, it was on a Sunday, and my Uncle Tom came over, and a couple of other people that were going to have a birthday thing, see. So he came over, and he had a present for me. And everybody else gave me stuff like fielder's mitts and all that stuff. And I opened up the present, and what do you think it was? Talk about a stroke of genius. It was an old, worn-out telegraph key that he had gotten from one of the, you know, from the railroad there. They probably had storehouses full of them. But it was an old, worn-out telegraph key, and it was a sounder in one of these little boxes. But the telegraph key is there, see. And he says now, and I was gassed, you know. Holy smokes, what a stroke of genius, you know. He gave me this telegraph key. So he says, now I'm going to show you what you do with it. So he had another bag, and he takes out of the bag, he takes out these dry cells, you know, these big round dry cell type batteries, and he connects the dry cells, and he takes these two wires, and he connected it to the sounder and the key, and he says, now press the key. So I press the key, and it goes tick, 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 tick. He says, now, see, you can send messages. So I'm working with, by the way, it just drove my mother out of her bird. That thing just, I'd run that night and day, you know, it's going tick, 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 tick. And with it, he gave me a copy of the Morse code. Now, there's two kinds of Morse codes. Did you know that? There's the International Morse and the Continental Morse. And the Continental Morse is the one used for telegraph. The International Morse is the radio Morse code. Now, they're different because, you know, when you have a sounder that ticks, you can't send a dash. In other words, radio goes da-da-da-da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da. Well, a continental sounder just goes tick, 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 tick. And it's the spacing between the ticks that's important. Well, the first code I ever learned was the continental code. It was a very rare code. And I only learned it because I was a kid, you know, and he had this thing, and I'm sending these messages, say. So that fantastic gift, well, I had that thing. And it was an old thing. I had it for a long time. I used to have it in my bed, you know, up in the bedroom. I have it up on a bookshelf and all that when I was a kid. Well, one time when we moved, that disappeared. We arrived at the new house, and they had all the barrels full of books and the old tennis shoes. The worst stuff arrives intact. Nothing, it arrives intact, like an old beach ball that has been wrecked and is useless. That will arrive absolutely, and they'll even wrap it in tissue paper, in a box so that it doesn't get shocked. I'm gonna tell you, the good stuff, forget it, friend. So this sounder, and I didn't discover it at first. See, I at first, when you move into a new house, all the barrels and the boxes and all that jazz are all piled up. We didn't move that much, but we did move, and everything is all in an uproar, and we had new rooms and all that stuff, and so it must have been 6 months before our house actually shook down and everything was unpacked, and my mother finally got up the bookshelves and all that jazz. Well, one night, I'm in my bedroom, and all of a sudden it hit me, where's my sounder? I said, it must be in the basement. We still had some stuff down there, old papers and junk. No, forget it. My key and my sounder, which was put in a box, had disappeared. And I've never forgotten it. That has rankled. Now, it's not worth anything. The old telegraph keys, in case you're curious, are not worth anything because there were trillions of them made. But it was just the fact that it was there. It was my telegraph key. It was an old, what they call an old sidewinder type telegraph key. And it was the railroad type with a sounder. And I've always been bugged because of that. Once in a while, when I see these great moving commercials come on TV, these guys, boy, they'll move everything. See, I say, oh, yeah. The one that shows the girl, the little kid, and they bring the doll out and all that stuff. I think of that sounder. I want to kill him, Well, I've always, since that time, had a sneaking desire to have another one of those. If anybody has an old telegraph key that's down in the basement in the old tennis shoes, send it along and I'll give it a good home. And I mean it, because it's been discouraging, that a guy should have. Now, when you're a kid, you always figure when you're grown up, you're going to get anything you want. There's not going to be any problem. You get credit cards and all. There's a lot of stuff you don't get when you're grown up. Do you agree with that, man? That you would have wanted as a kid, you just don't do it. And you secretly, like for example, for a long time, I always wanted to have a really good Red Ryder BB gun. Well, I got one. I really did get one. And it's curious how that fills a void. Now, I have never had a desire to have a flexible flyer sled. I'm going to be very subversive because I never did. Did you? Or you had one? Huh? Well, I never had a desire to have a flexible flyer sled. And I never was a sled type. Everybody used to go, no. What's the matter? Oh, yeah, well, there was not much to do out there with sleds. No, that's right, you just pull it around. It was too flat, yeah. So flexible flyers, it's like a guy living in Olathe, Kansas. He doesn't have a terrible desire to own a sunfish sailboat. He just doesn't. Doesn't turn him on. A guy living in the middle of, say, the plains of Oklahoma, he doesn't have a terrible desire to own a set of head skis or anything like that. So I never had a sled thing, and so I've known guys that did. And it never turned me on, so don't tell me where I can get a mint condition flexible flyer. That doesn't do anything. Get it yourself, friend. You know what you can do with it. But there are other things, though, that I would... I'll tell you one of the things I always wanted as a kid. I'll tell you. It's going to sound ridiculous to you. Don't get mad. Don't get bugged when I tell you. I'm just going to come out. I'm being truthful. You don't mind, do you? I always wanted a stuffed owl. Well, now I'm going to tell you why. There's a reason for everything, Matt. Don't get mad. Everybody has a reason. I'm not going to come around and get mad because you want a green bowling ball or something like that. That's your thing. The reason was there was a kid named Stanley Roper in our neighborhood. And Stanley Roper was a little bit older than the rest of us. And he was kind of the Jack Armstrong of the neighborhood. He played on a basketball team and all that. Had a sweater with a big letter and all that stuff. See? So Stanley Roper was kind of a pace setter. He was it. What Stanley Roper did, that's what the little squirts would try to do later on. Never quite pull off, but that's what they wanted to do. So one time, there were 3 or 4 of us, and Stanley Roper deigned to have us come in, and something we're doing, he came up to his house, and I was in Stanley Roper's room. Well, Stanley Roper and a whole bunch of us were in his room doing something. I don't recall what it was, what we were doing, but I did one thing that got me. On top of Stanley Roper's bureau, where he kept all his great stuff, like his letters and his fantastic pair of Chicago ice skates, racing model. He had 3 or 4 great fielder's mitts. He was a center fielder on a high school baseball team. Remember, I was in 8th grade or something at the time. On top of this bureau drawer, right on top was this magnificent stuffed owl. And he had his wings out, looking real mad. And he had a hold of a branch. Now look at it. Wow, stuffed owl. All I had was stuff. Well, I tell you what I did have on the top of mine in case it's sickening. You have to constantly apologize for your own bad stuff and the poorness that you've got. I had a 3.5-inch high plastic model of Wimpy. It was one of my favorite things. Do you remember Wimpy? All right, I'll ask you a question about Wimpy. What is it that Wimpy wanted to eat all the time? Right, and what day was he going to pay for the hamburger that he got today? No. There was one day. He never said tomorrow. You're getting close. You got 6 more choices. At least you're in the week, anyway. Well, all right, I'll ask you another question I was a Wimpy fan. I'll ask you another question, because I loved hamburgers. I'll ask you another question. Who was the guy that Wimpy was always trying to buy the hamburgers from? It's the same guy all the time. Who was he? You don't know, huh? Well, now that's when your mind is filled with that kind of trivia, you find it hard to keep up with J.K. Galbraith. I don't think he ever heard of Wimpy. But that's right. But on top of my bureau drawer, when I was a kid, I had this little 3.5-inch or 5-inch high plastic model of Wimpy, and he had a derby hat on. You remember he wore his derby? And he had in his hand a plastic hamburger. He was looking kind of silly, He looked like a little bit like W.C. Fields, as a matter of fact. Possibly he was even based on W.C. But I have never forgotten that key. That has rankled. And have you ever wondered why Shepard is ill-tempered at times, irascible, makes bad remarks? There's a lot of little things down on my soul like that. Oh, yeah. One of the worst things. Oh, yeah, the time my bicycle was stolen. Never got it back. Oh, I'm still bugged by that. Absolutely. It was parked outside of the A&P. I was getting a loaf of bread and stuff, I was sent to the store, so I took my bike like a fool. Came out, gone. Forget Itsville. That's the kind of stuff you never forget. And it believe me, it corrodes your soul. Ultimately, you have no faith in your fellow man. Oh, no. And it was a brand new bike. What model? It was an Elgin. It was an Elgin Trailblazer. You want to get really technical about it. 26-inch wheel. The whole thing. My telegraph key's gone. My bicycle is gone. All right, I'll tell you about the chick that I once knew when I was a sophomore. Do you want to hear what happened to her? I thought I was making time. Right out from under my nose, this guy took her. Everywhere you go, your fellow man is not to be trusted. And by the way, I hope you understand that I am your fellow man. So I would suggest you don't trust me. That's just a word to the... what is it? It's a word to the something is sufficient. It's right on the tip of my tongue. You're getting closer, Mac. Now you only got 3 days left to choose from. There you are. WOR New York. Next, Lester Smith and the news.
News in detail on the hour from the WOR newsroom. South Dakota Senator George McGovern just about has Rhode Island's 22 presidential convention nomination votes right in his column.
Tonight, that state's Democratic primary returns have McGovern leading Minnesota Senator Hubert Humphrey by a strong margin. With 78% of Rhode Island's precincts reporting, McGovern has 41% of the vote. Humphrey has 20% of the vote. Next is Maine Senator Edmund Muskie, who has stopped his active primary campaigning, but he, too, has 20% of the vote. Then Alabama's Governor George Wallace in fourth place with 16% of the Rhode Island vote. President Nixon has overwhelmingly won the state's Republican primary. He has 90% of the vote. Oregon polls are just closing at this hour. In that important primary, 34 Democratic delegates are at stake. United States military sources in Saigon have reported that American fighter planes shot down 4 Soviet-built MiG fighters. Air Force and Navy fighters were escorting bombers on raids against a railroad line inside North Vietnam when the MiGs tried to intercept. Meanwhile, Radio Hanoi reported that 8 United States planes were shot down while attacking what it called many populated areas in North Vietnam. United States command policy is not to announce American plane losses if search and rescue operations are being conducted for downed pilots. Inside South Vietnam, the Bien Hoa Air Base, 15 miles from Saigon, was hit with 8 rockets, 1 South Vietnamese soldier killed, and in An Loc, North Vietnamese troops fired more than 1,000 rounds of artillery into that devastated provincial capital, but they have yet to take the town. In Washington today, a foreign aid bill picked up an advise and consent rider along with an End the War amendment. New Jersey's Republican Senator Clifford Case introduced an amendment to the $1.7 billion measure to bar the use of any American funds to pay for our military bases or nuclear weapons abroad unless approved by the Senate as treaties. Case said that the Constitution made it absolutely clear that major agreements with foreign nations must be ratified by the Senate